Today we're going to be talking about a few horror movies from the 80s that I think should get a reboot treatment. I know. For the past 10 plus years, everybody has been complaining about Hollywood, saying that they're stale, they've ran out of ideas, and the writers just aren't creative anymore. But I think that these three movies from the 80s would benefit from a reboot or a remake. So I grew up watching these movies when I was a kid or a teenager. I've seen them a few times on TV, and I probably also rented them from Blockbuster. I know I'm showing my age. You can say that this is nostalgia for me, but I really do think that the premise of these movies are that good. I'm sure they have a cult following, and I do think that they would really benefit from a reboot. So, number 3, the first one on our list, is a 1980s horror movie called Motel Hell. This one really stuck with me, and I just will always remember the heads in the ground and the serial killer that wears the pig mask. I mean, I know that there are tons of iconic horror movie killers that wear masks, like Jason and Leatherface and Michael Myers, but this one should also be on the list. So from what I remember on this movie, it basically takes place on a farm, and you have these farmers who sell this special meat. You have this one person of the family who basically kills these travelers who come through, and he wears a pig mask. Now I think that this was super iconic. I always remembered this mask. And then you also had, they would bury the travelers that they caught alive, and then you would have just their heads sticking up out of the ground. Yes, this may be nostalgic for me. This may be just why I want this film to be rebooted, but it had some great scenery for the time, and it's been such a long time since this movie came out in 1980. So the technology is obviously a lot better now. As long as you can get a good screenwriter on there and a decent director and actors, I think that this movie can carry itself and can bring the cult following that it has. This movie has always stuck with me from when I was a kid. I love this movie. So coming in at number 2 on the list is The Gate. From 1987, kickstart in Stephen Dorff's career. This movie, again, seeing this as a kid, this really stuck with me, and it had awesome visuals. And I believe, given with today's technology, a reboot of this movie could really be good. So this movie is about a few kids who are left home alone over the weekend as their parents go out of town, and there's some construction going on in the suburbs. They find this hole in their backyard. Basically, they unlock something from what I remember, and then you have a bunch of these little demons come out of the ground, and then you have an eyeball that grows on Stephen Dorff's hand, and he stabs it. And then you also have the record players, them spinning it backwards to have the band's hidden message. This one was a fun movie. I feel like it didn't take itself too seriously. From what I remember though, that this movie, again, really stuck with me. The visuals are so great. The demons in this movie were made from stop motion, if I remember correctly. Yeah, it could be somewhat dated now, watching the movie. And this is why I think a reboot of this movie could really be beneficial for the cult, for the fans of this movie, because I think that this is one of the more popular films on the list out of the 3. And it also has a big name star. I mean, we know Stephen Dorff from Blade and other films. This movie was a fun movie back in the day. I actually really enjoyed this movie. I watched it anytime it was on TV, and I really do wish that Hollywood would come back to this one. So the number 1 movie on my list of horror movies from the 80s that I think should get the reboot treatment is the 1981 horror movie, The Funhouse. This, again, is another movie that I watched as a kid, and I absolutely love this movie. Probably because it took place in a funhouse. This movie is about a traveling carnival that has some secrets behind it. These 4 teenagers spend the night in the funhouse that's in the carnival, and they find out these secrets, and they start getting picked off one by one, and they're being chased by a killer in a Frankenstein monster mask. So, this is one that's always stuck with me. Again, I absolutely loved this film when I was younger. When I first saw the trailer for House of a Thousand Corpses back in 2002, 2003, I immediately thought, could this be a remake of The Funhouse? Ever since seeing that trailer, the first 10 minutes, 15 minutes of that film, where it took place in the Dr. Satan attraction, it was so colorful and so vibrant, but it was creepy as shit. I always thought that this could be a Funhouse sequel or the Funhouse reboot. It just gave off those vibes. Seeing the trailer back in 2002, 2003, and knowing that Rob Zombie is definitely capable of horror movies, and he has his love for movie monsters and the Universal monsters, I always thought, and still do to this day, that he would be the number one choice, the number one pick to reboot the Funhouse. I think he is completely in his wheelhouse. I know you're not watching this, but somebody send this to Rob Zombie and get this fucking movie remade. This screams Rob Zombie. This would be such a great film for him to reboot. Yeah, so those three are my top 3 horror movies from the 80s that I would love to see be remade. Let me know what you guys think, what you guys think about those movies, if these movies are like too obscure or like nobody's ever heard of them. I'm sure if you're a horror fan, I'm sure you've heard of these and seen these. I feel like these movies do have a good cult following, which is why I do believe that rebooting these movies wouldn't be completely a horrible idea. But also let me know what your top 3 horror movies from the 80s are that you would love to see be remade. There's tons of movies out there. This is what I grew up on. I grew up on horror movies, especially horror movies from the 80s. So I'm sure there's tons of movies out there that I would love to see be remade. And it was a tough choice, but these 3 movies defined my childhood or my exposure to horror movies at that time. These movies, maybe because I was younger, and I'm not talking like 5 years old, I'm talking like maybe 9 to 12 kind of thing. Maybe because these movies, while they were horror movies and while they weren't really appropriate for me probably at the time, they weren't super scary. They were like more playful, they were more aesthetically pleasing. I mean, these movies looked good for the time, and they had some pretty cool imagery. This is probably why these stuck with me the most. But again, yeah, let me know what you guys think. I'm so curious to hear what other 80s horror movies people want to see be remade. But yeah, until the next time, later.